Hey everybody, it's me, Uncommon Soap, and for over a year I have been developing my very own Pokemon region based off of Dungeons & Dragons. A few months ago I did a live stream where I introduced the designs and talked about a couple of the inspirations. And since then, one of our community managers has actually started to make a ROM hack with these Pokemon. So I think it's about time that we made another video so we can take a closer look at the region. I hope that you enjoy it, and if you do, make sure to hit all the buttons and do all the things, but let's get into it. So like I said a few moments ago, the Aetheria region is based off of Dungeons & Dragons, but more specifically the Sword Coast, in the Forgotten Realms. Hundreds of years ago, the people of Aetheria could use magic, and with it there was wondrous technology. But one day that all changed, with the emergence of mysterious creatures called Pokemon. And as the Pokemon population continued to grow, the people of Aetheria's connection to magic gradually began to fade. And nowadays the people of the region are wholly dependent on Pokemon to provide the convenience and technology that they used to be able to do themselves with their own magic. And that's when we're introduced to Professor Violet, who researches the connection that Pokemon have to magic and why it's lost to humanity. The obvious inspiration for Professor Violet is that he's a wizard, but more specifically, this wizard. Moving on to our protagonists, there are some notable differences between them and our typical Pokemon protagonists. For one, I had them designed to be more like typical adventurers in a D&D or fantasy game. And as opposed to a digital Pokedex, it's something more akin to a spellbook. You can also see a gauntlet on each of their left hands with a Mega Stone embedded. While I don't have any Mega Evolutions yet, with the full release of a game, I hope to get some designed. But enough about the people. We all know why you're here. Pokemon! So let's take a look at our 3 starter Pokemon. Starting things off, we have our grass starter Pokemon, Kabark. These small bear Pokemon are very protective of their trainers. And in the wild, Kabark protect smaller Pokemon from various predators. When Kabark evolves into Ursark, it gains the fairy typing as well as some bark armor. These Pokemon clear out parts of forests to act as a sanctuary for both Pokemon as well as humans who get lost in the woods. And finally, when reaching their final evolution, Ursark evolves into Sylvanor. These massive guardian Pokemon are covered in barky armor and serve as guardians for entire forest regions. These Pokemon are based off of moon druids. And honestly, I'm gonna throw it out there, this one's my favorite. But moving on to our fire starter, we have Flarekit. These small fiery cats are native to the mountainous regions of Aetheria, where they are often used to heat the homes of native settlers. But wild Flarekit love to explore caves and ruins looking for shiny treasures. And when Flarekit evolves, it gains the ice typing, becoming Flashinx. The inspiration becomes pretty obvious right away, with both the fire and ice typings being the most common offensive spells for evocation wizards. Plus, it has an ice wand. Flashinx and their trainers continue to search through ancient ruins, trying to find mystical artifacts that can give some sort of indication about the magic from the past. And when Flashinx evolve, they become Magmeowser. Wild Magmeowsers are often found in the deepest part of caves, endlessly studying the ancient ruins and trying to unlock additional magic. Once again, the inspiration for these guys is pretty obvious with evocation wizards, and I absolutely love the fire and ice dual typing. Anyways, for our final starter Pokemon, we're gonna move on to Tidepup. Tidepup are used in coastal towns to help predict the weather, so that way fishermen know when it's safe to go out. And when Tidepup evolves, they become Tempowl, gaining the electric typing. Tempowl's newfound electric powers are actually overwhelming for it, and if it isn't constantly exercising, it becomes incredibly aggressive. So often the small coastal towns and villages that raise the Tidepups need to send the Tempowls up to sea to try to calm the storm within. And when they finally reach inner enlightenment, they evolve into Lycanite. After finding proper balance between their water and electric powers, Lycanite return to the land. And not only can they predict the weather, they have absolute control over it. Lycanite are based off of Tempest Clerics and just a little tiny bit of 4 Elements Monks. So what do you think of our starter Pokemon? Normally when moving on from here, we'd get to our Route 1 Pokemon, but because this is the D&D region, we're gonna do something a little bit different and introduce our 5 Chromatic Dragon Pokemon. In my mind, these Dragon Pokemon were probably among the first to be discovered, which is why they're landed at the front of the Pokedex, even though they would be quite rare. So starting off with our red dragon, we have Kindred, who has the very obvious dragon fire typing. Much like Flarekit, these tiny little fellas are obsessed with treasure. The difference is that they employ smaller Pokemon to gather it for them. Eventually, a Kindred will evolve into Ember Horde. With this significant power boost, Ember Horde are able to employ much more powerful Pokemon to do their bidding. Plus, they can help make their own dragons, which we'll see a little bit later on. But eventually, Ember Horde will ascend to its final form, a Volca Vault. These massive dragon Pokemon are found in the darkest places of the region, attacking anyone silly enough to try and infiltrate its treasure hoards. Next up, we're going to take a look at our blue dragon, Snapult, who has the electric typing. While red dragons are our traditional treasure gatherers, Snapult are aggressive and are always looking for a fight. And when Snapult evolves, it becomes Boltorn. These Pokemon travel around Aetheria looking for a challenge, and they are willing to win by any means necessary. And eventually, Boltorn will evolve into Bolt Titan. Bolt Titan in its previous forms are some of the foremost apex predators of Aetheria. But that doesn't always mean that they fight fair. They're willing to win battles by any means necessary, and if they just happen to find an opponent stronger than it, they have no problem picking it up, flying into the air, and then dropping it from someplace very high. Moving on, we're going to take a look at our white dragons, who are the most aggressive and animalistic out of all of the chromatic dragons. So first up, we have Cryoling. This first stage is physically frail. Cryoling itself is incredibly physically frail, and starts off as a scavenger in the northernmost parts of the region, but once they evolve into Cryo Lash, they become significantly more powerful and aggressive. And now that their wings have more than doubled in size, they're able to fly to the highest parts of the Rocky Mountains of Aetheria and strike down from above. Eventually, Cryo Lash will evolve one more time into Cryopex. Cryopex are fiercely territorial and aggressive, and for many people traveling through the mountains of Aetheria, a Cryopex is the last thing that you see. Next up, we're going to take a look at our green dragons, and we're going to start things off with Smile. Green dragons like to make their homes in swamps, which helps to explain why it looks like a silly little crocodile. And when Smile evolves into Toxalure, its tail has become a gigantic poison sac which it uses to paralyze its foes. And finally, Toxalure will evolve into Noxagile. The toxic sacs have moved onto its paws, and it's still wearing that same playful expression that it has all along. These dragons try to look friendly and inviting to other Pokemon or travelers throughout swampy areas of Aetheria, but that's just a ruse to try to get them to come close enough for them to take them down. Finally, moving on to our black dragons, we're gonna have Hatchsting. Black dragons operate very similarly to red dragons, where they like to pick up treasure hoards. The only difference is that Hatchsting in its evolved forms like to make those treasure hoards where people are supposed to be. So often, Hatchsting in its evolved form of Scoreake will attack rural towns throughout the area to try to carve out their own little bases for their treasure hoards. I've always been bummed that there's not a proper bug dragon Pokemon, so as you can see, we're taking inspiration with that with the Scorpion Stinger as well as the Mandibles. Eventually, when a Scoreake becomes powerful enough, it'll evolve into Scorpigon. Scorpigon almost never leave their treasure hoards, and will often send their smaller evolutions out to take care of pesky things like hunting for it. So moving on from our dragon Pokemon, let's take a look at some of our early route Pokemon. And first, we're going to have our basic little bug, Buzzlet. Buzzlet's incredible speed make them absolutely essential for farming communities in Aetheria. And they have two evolutions based off of gender. So first off, male Buzzlet evolve into Wasquire, gaining the fighting typing. Wasquire are based off of Oath of the Crown Paladins, and are often used by city guards or local law enforcement. Their stingers are capable of breaking through rock, and they are incredibly powerful despite their small size. Female Buzzlet, however, have a different evolution. They become Ferroqueen, based off of Glamour Bards, and they use their natural pheromones to have other Pokemon do their fighting for them, as you can see with the two little Buzzlet with the pink eyes surrounding the queen. A lot of cities and towns throughout Aetheria will purposefully evolve just one female Buzzlet into a Ferroqueen while leaving the other female Buzzlet to help out with farming, because if a Wasquire has a queen to protect, they actually fight even more aggressively, because I really wanted to hammer home the whole Oath of the Crown thing. But anyways, moving on, let's take a look at our next regional bug, who is going to be Gruboil. Gruboil excrete a highly flammable, oil. In the wild, Gruboil are used to clear out dead parts of forests. However, in human civilization, their oil is mostly used for lighting. And when Gruboil evolve, they become Fernant, who are now able to shoot and ignite that oil from their mandibles. Gruboil and Fernant are based off of wildfire druids, and are integral to the cycle of rebirth in nature throughout Aetheria. Next up, let's take a look at Neurat. Neurat are based off of Cranium Rats and gain their psychic powers due to their proximity to other mind-controlling Pokemon. While a Neurat's psychic powers in and of itself are very weak, when they evolve into Neuraking, they become significantly more powerful. And with their whiskers and part of their fur becoming more tentacle-like, you can begin to see the influence from their illithid overlords. But we'll check out the Mind Flayer a little bit later. For now, Neuraking's psychic power is significantly higher than that when it was a Neurat, and they're actually able to take control of their own own little rat hordes to do their bidding for them. Next up, let's take a look at our regional burn Dawnling, who are based off of Phoenix, Light Clerics, and the God Lathander. Dawnling evolve into Soulhawk, and the flames on his head burn so bright that when they fly high enough up in the sky, they look like small shooting stars. Soulhawk like to make their nests on some of the highest peaks of Aetheria, so that way when they evolve into Heliowing. Heliowing's flames are so bright that when they wake up each morning, it's like a second sunrise. Next up, let's take a look at our wizard familiar Pokemon, Tresker. Tresker love collecting shiny objects for their trainers, who usually are very small children. And when an unbreakable bond is forged with their trainer, Tresker evolves into Familiper. Both Tresker and Familiper are based off of Tresham, which are basically just wing cats, as well as wizards' familiars, and the fact that they love to gather small treasures really helps to drive home the whole familiar thing. Next up, we're going to take a look at Coprite. These small poisonous snakes love to dig their way into rocky terrain, to pop out to try to catch unsuspecting prey. When they evolve, they become Nagalith, who are a mix between Yuan-Ti as well as Nagas. And just as a quick aside, the artist completely nailed what I wanted here, and Nagalith is one of my favorites out of all of these Pokemon. But anyways, moving on, let's take a look at Lambolt. Mountain civilizations often use Lambolt as well as its evolved form Temperies as transportation, and with each step of their massive hooves, it sounds like thunder in the distance. Lambolt as well as Temperies are based off of Storm Herald Barbarians. I love the big Stormcloud mane on Temperies. Our next transportation Pokemon is going to be Fawnbull. Fawnbull themselves are incredibly weak, but once they evolve into the massive Galahorn, they become incredibly physically tough. But even with their newfound size, they are incredibly gentle creatures, often using their massive antlers to disarm and counter opponents rather than fighting them directly. Galahorn are also this region's most common transportation method for humans, and they're representative of just rangers in general traversing various landscapes. Next up, let's take a look at this little groundy goon known as Burager. These small badger Pokemon create massive underground networks that are often big enough and complex enough to actually be used by people. And very often, adventurers will use Burager as well as its evolved form, Terravling, to create hidden underground bases, and town and city planners often actually use Terravling to create underground highways to make trade routes safer. Burager and Terravling are both based off of scout rogues, and I think that their massive underground networks also help to drive that home. But I think it's about time that we took a look at a couple of ghastly ghouls. So first up, we have Gaskull, the pure ghost Pokemon. Gaskull has a split evolution depending on what type of weapon you give it, and they're also representative of the zombies and skeletons that necromancers would summon. So for its first form, we're gonna have Ghoulist. Gaskull evolves into a Ghoulist when it's given a piece of weapon or armor, and you can still see the little ghost friend possessing this skeleton with a silly little sword. But it's not done yet. Ghoulist will actually evolve into Ghosternaut. I decided to go with normal as opposed to fighting type, since Ghoulist and Ghosternaut aren't formally trained in any way, they're just kinda like ghosts swinging a sword around. But anyways, if you give a Gaskull a wand or a staff, it'll evolve into Frostgeist. I was torn between giving it ice or dark typing, but I ultimately landed on it being a little Frost Mage, and Frostgeist will eventually evolve into Frostgrim. And as you can see, the little ghost has actually migrated to the staff to keep itself protected, as opposed to being a part of the skeletal body itself. But we're not done yet. If a Gaskull is the ghost finding a host, Gasling is that ghost by itself. Gaslings are driven mad without the direction that a host body would provide for it. And when 999 of these unhappy little haunts gather together, they become Ectospite, a shambling angry mound of spectral energy. Ectospite have no direction and attack everything on sight. Moving on from our ghosts, let's take a look at Inarim, the dream Pokemon. Inarim are often drawn to people having nightmares, and most often to children, where they'll enter their dreams and calm them to ease their suffering. Inarim will eventually evolve into Volphius, who work as dream guardians to try to ease the suffering and sadness of everyone around it. Inarim and Volphius are based off of Circle of the Dream Druids, and I absolutely love the little moonstone horn that it has. Next up, let's take a look at Illusionx. And it and its evolved form of Gloomsnarl are both pretty obviously based off of Displacer Beasts. They live deep in the forests and jungles of Aetheria and are capable of creating illusions to try to lure prey in, before they snap at them with their tentacle mouths, or their actual mouth. or their claws. They're not very nice. But not only are these two Pokemon based off of Displacer Beast, but they're also based off of Gloomstalker Rangers. Our next Pokemon is also a Fatal Jungle Pokemon. In its first form is Bullywog. Bullywog and its evolved forms are tree frogs. And these little fellows will ball up to try to look like berries to have unsuspecting bird and insect Pokemon come try to eat it. But when it evolves into Veneleep, it begins to grow these poisonous warts all over its body, which it can actually throw at unsuspecting prey. And when it evolves, it'll become Dendemire, who is not only incredibly fast, but is significantly more poisonous than its two previous counterparts. These Pokemon are pretty obviously based off of poison dart frogs, but they're also based off of assassin rogues. Next up is another one of my favorites, and that's Sprigshield. These small little rocks are actually brought to life by the fallen souls of heroes, and you can see that with the enchanted shield embedded in its head. And when Sprigshield evolves, it becomes Grovardian. The magical shield is turned into bark armor, a warhammer, as well as a shield. And Grovardians often work with Sylvanor to protect the deepest parts of forests. They're based off of Oath of the Ancient Paladins, and I'm going to throw it out there, I absolutely adore Grovardian. Next up, we have a Pokemon with some pretty unique typing, and that's gonna be Phaseling. Phaseling and its evolved form Arachnoblink are phase spiders, which means that they can teleport and blink around. And while Phaseling will use their teleportation powers to pounce on unsuspecting prey, Arachnoblink is actually able to take its prey with it when it brings it back up to its web. But that also means that a trainer could use Arachnoblink to teleport around themselves. And from a design perspective, I love the false eyes on Arachnoblink's crest, especially because its natural eyes, despite it trying to look fierce, are actually really cute. Bringing on another bug, let's take a look at Wigworm. Even though it might not look like much, Wigworm are actually over 6 feet long. And its evolved form, Tremolude, is actually the largest Pokemon in the Pokedex. Tremolude will grow indefinitely, and they're based off of giant purple worms. And there's not much else to say. They are giant purple worms. And also, yes, this name is a Dune reference. Moving on, next, let's take a look at Scrap Pup. Scrap Pup form into packs where they constantly fight one another to find out who the alpha's gonna be. And the strongest of their group is the first one to evolve into a Scrappyena. But we're not quite done yet. Once all the pups evolve into hyenas, the strongest of those will venture out on its own, looking for even stronger opponents. But without its family, it'll evolve into Nullbrawl, not only gaining the dark typing, but it goes from being playful to being very aggressive. Nullbrawl and his previous evolutions are based off of gnolls as well as hyenas. Moving on from there, we're gonna take a look at Luna Pup. Not only is Luna Pup based off of God's favorite princess, but it's also based off of Char and Saloon, and their constant fighting. So the first evolution is going to be when it follows Saloon and becomes Lycanrope. For anybody not super acquainted with D&D, Saloon is the goddess of the moon. Alternatively, if Luna Pup is overcome with grief and loss, it will evolve into Lawsound. While Saloon is the goddess of the moon and the promise of what a new day brings, Char is the goddess of loss and of night. And I wanted their two types to be in direct opposition of one another, so that way they would be neutral to one another. And Hero did a wonderful job in taking effectively the same Pokemon and making them a yin and yang of one another. Moving on, we actually have the first Pokemon that I ever designed for this region, Crabward. Crabward is a little hermit crab that actually made its home in a potion bottle. But not only that, you can see the spell scroll that's also lodged in the bottle. And when it evolves into Crustress, not only has its potion gotten bigger and has grabbed a couple more spell scrolls, but it's accidentally cast Globe of Invulnerability on itself. Crabward and Crustress were actually the first Pokemon that I had an idea for, so you can thank the two of them for this entire region. Next up, let's take a look at Kobling. Back at the beginning of the Pokedex, I talked about how there were Pokemon that the Red Dragon employed to do its dirty work for it. Well, that's this little guy. Kobolds are tiny little non-dragons who often serve dragons throughout the D&D multiverse. And often one of the reasons why they serve dragons is because they hope to be one someday. And if a Kobling is lucky enough, it'll evolve into Dracold, kind of sort of becoming a dragon. But it does gain the dragon typing, so that's basically it. While its wings are too small for flight, they can be used to give themselves a little bit of an extra boost. And after evolving, Dracold will often take a bunch of Kobling with it to try to make its own little dragon horde. Next, let's take a look at Chimera. These fiery little fellas are based off of chimeras, and I absolutely love this in its evolved form of Chimeroar. When using its wings to give it a little bit of a boost to glide around, Chimeroar are actually some of the fastest land Pokemon in the entire Aetherian Pokedex. Next up is gonna be Ensor. And when these happy little Littlefoot evolve, they become Tridra. And I think you all know where we're going with this when Tydra becomes Heptydra. Each of these massive Pokemons has their own distinct personality, and on rare occasions when they work together, their combined brain power makes them some of the smartest Pokemon in the entire Pokedex. Taking a look up next, we have Ceramite, who is obviously based off of Mind Flayers in Illithids. Ceramites are too weak to adventure out on their own, so they often mind control smaller Pokemon, like Nurat, to gather food for it. Or they'll mind control an unsuspecting Pokemon and sometimes person to be its food. Anywho, once they evolve, they become Illithoid. Illithoid are incredibly powerful Pokemon, and even though they look like very tall, imposing figures, their robe are actually just tentacles draped down to look like a robe. Illithoid are powerful enough to enthrall dozens of Pokemon at a time. Next up, we have our Sun Soul Monk Pokemon, who starts off as Monkey, who then evolves into Brawlkey, and Brawlkey will eventually ascend into Meditate. Like I said a moment ago, these Pokemon are based off of Sun Soul Monks, but their most obvious inspiration also comes from Saiyans, right down to those orange pants and golden hairdo. I'm realizing as I go through this list, a lot of my Pokemon are just little fellas, and there's nobody more fella-like than Sproutly. Sproutly in its evolved forms are based off of Treants, and I love its offset little seed eyes. Sproutly will eventually evolve into Okent, and I absolutely love how its arms grew much further up the tree than you'd think it would. And he's kind of giving a little shrug like, nah, what are you gonna do? But what you're gonna do is evolve into Elderwoad. Moving on from there, our next Pokemon up is gonna be Mudsnap. And these ferocious snapping turtles will eventually evolve into Tydrapin. Mudsnap and Tydrapin are based off of not only snapping turtles, but also off of dragon turtles. And Tydrapin are among the largest water-based Pokemon in the entire Aetherian Dex. Our next Pokemon are based off of dwarves, as well as their ancient cities, so let me introduce you to Minor. I wanted a little dwarf fella to look kind of like a Met from Mega Man, and we got exactly that here. I absolutely love this design, and when Minor evolves into Forjor, not only has it grown significantly in size, but its two pickaxe arms are used for mining and construction. But these Pokemon not only build homes underground, they also defend them, so Forjor will eventually evolve into Warlore. Equipped with two battle axes, these sentry Pokemon are used to defend the various underground civilizations throughout Aetheria. Next up is gonna be this little lady, Sizzimp. Sizzimp are based off of devils, but more specifically off of succubi. So when Sizzimp evolves into Flamora, you can definitely see some of that inspiration going on. And with its final form of Sulfurus, these alluring Pokemon live deep underground, using their flames to attract unsuspecting prey. Next up, we have this happy little shark, Riptike. In Riptike in its evolved form, Thrashark are based off of the concept of a barbarian's rage. They use their hooked fins and tails to drag their opponents to the bottom of the sea, and as long as they're awake, they never stop fighting. Moving on, let's take a look at our Hunter-Ranger Pokemon, Frostlet. Based off of a snowy owl, these Pokemon freeze their feathers and use their powerful legs to throw them at foes. And when Frostlet evolves into Arctoshot, its tail actually becomes a crossbow, significantly increasing its firepower, as well as its hunting ability. I wanted to have an archer owl, but I wanted it to be distinctly different than something like Decidueye. And Hero, as usual, did an absolutely amazing job. Moving on next to our Mimic Pokemon, we have Mimima. There's not much to say. It's a Mimic. I love the inverse Pokeball as its eye, and I'd like to imagine that in Aetheria, a Mimima could transform itself into basically anything, just like an actual Mimic would in Dungeons & Dragons. Next up, we're going to take a look at some of our Artificer Pokemon, starting off with Arcor. Just like in every fantasy world, ancient Aetheria had advanced technology, and all those old disabled batteries reanimated as Arcor, and it can slot itself into a couple of different armors to change its stats and properties, much like an armorer Artificer. So first up, we have Cortris, who's a big old burly boy wielding Thunder Gauntlet. These ancient golems were the power lifters of ancient Aetheria. Alternatively, Arcor can slot itself into some power armor, becoming Corvault, who's incredibly nimble and equipped with a couple of laser cannons on its back. Armorer Artificers are effectively Iron Man, and I love how both of these designs take the Hulkbuster as well as the standard Mark armor as general design ideas, but make them completely different. Let me know which one's your favorite. But moving on from there, we have Jelixir. Jelixir is a happy little sentient potion who's just squirming out of its bottle. But this happy little potion is also a gelatinous cube, so it'll eventually evolve into Jeltalist. As it explores the world, it gets larger and larger as it sucks up more and more stuff, including its own potion bottle as well as some general debris. Jeltalist will eventually evolve into Alchemax, who can grow indefinitely like a little Katamari rolling its ball around. When designing each of these stages, I wanted it to maintain its tiny little face and happy expression all throughout, despite the fact that it's very clearly sucked up a lot more than just some random junk. Next up, we have Voltical. Voltical and its evolution, Absurge, are based off of Storm Sorcerers, which is evident with their combined water and electric powers. And I really wanted to have a cute little fella evolve into the mighty Kraken. Next from there, we have Villain, who is based off of a Hexblade Warlock. And if you know anything about a Hexblade Warlock in Dungeons & Dragons, the weapon that the Warlock wields either contains some sort of greater entity or is gifted to the Warlock by their patron and is imbued with some of their power. And I wanted that to come across with this weapon Pokemon. And when it evolves, it becomes Villusion. Something I wanted to do to differentiate this from the Aegislash line was that the weapon Pokemon itself would create an illusionary wielder to swing the weapon around. And eventually Villusion will evolve into Vilemorn, who becomes a massive scythe after harvesting a whole bunch of souls, and summons an entire Dark Knight to wield it. A nice little design choice here are the teeth hanging off of the pauldrons, letting you know that the weapon is what the Pokemon is, not the armored body. Our next Pokemon is a living embodiment of a wizard's overwhelming desire to cast Fireball. Say hello to Empyro, who, like I just said a moment ago, is a combination of every wizard's Ichi trigger finger once it hits level 5, combining that with an artillerist Artificer. And this little mad scientist wielding a fallen fire elemental really hammers that home. And speaking of elementals, that'll bring us to our next couple of Pokemon. First up, we have Ignos, the first stage of our fire elemental Pokemon. I wanted to have Pokemon representative of the 4 elemental planes, so Ignos will eventually evolve into Elderforge. You can definitely tell the inspiration here with a bomb from Final Fantasy and Ragnaros. Moving along, we're gonna have Droplice as our water elemental. This happy little water droplet actually has 2 ice claws on its fingers, which when they evolve into Frostide become full-fledged swords. It also forms some icy armor on the top half of its body, resembling everybody's favorite fallen prince. Next up, our earth elemental Peblor is just a happy little fella who works as sort of an opposite from the fire elemental. And when Peblor evolves into Kraggerok, I wanted to have a big hulking golem, whose only way of getting around was to drag itself by his gigantic arms. But moving on from this living statue, we have one more elemental, and that is Nimbus, our air elemental. These tiny little typhoons will then evolve into Cyclender. So what do you think about all of our elemental Pokemon? For our next Pokemon pair, let's take a look at our Beholder, Orblink. Orblink are incredibly playful and curious creatures, often trying to befriend other Pokemon throughout Aetheria. But what they don't realize is that they're packing 2 different types of death rays on the top of their head, so anybody that gets too close won't be very close to them for very long. And this loneliness and seclusion is evident when it evolves into Xanathorb, who technically is a spectator, but please don't judge me for that. Each of Xanathorb's eye stalks are capable of disabling their opponents in different ways, ranging from poison all the way to disintegration. Next up, we are gonna have Drillfin and Corsorok, who are based off of swordfish as well as swashbuckling rogues. These Pokemon help pirates and adventurers search for buried treasure and can drill deep into rock and coral beds, looking for forgotten layers and tombs. When I had sent notes over to the artist, when I sent notes over for the swordfish Pokemon, I knew that I wanted their horn to be a drill, but what I didn't expect was the crossguard face, and I really love that design choice with both of them. But moving on from Corsorok, we have Nabush, who are based off of Circle of the Spore Druids as well as Mycanoids. Mycanoids are mushroom people, and this is a little mushroom guy. And Nabush will evolve into Mashade, growing significantly, and I love that his mushroom is like an oversized hat now. And eventually, Mashade will evolve into Fungaro. You can't really tell from the photo, but when evolving from Mashade into Fungaro, these Pokemon shoot up several feet in height and can reach up to 6 feet tall, making for some absolutely massive grass-type Pokemon. And speaking of massive grass-type Pokemon, next up is Klabonk, who are based off of hill giants. And these little fellas go from bonking with clubs to bonking with entire trees when they evolve into Bashlog. And even with its massive body, it still has a relatively small head for its size. So you can glean about how intelligent these bad boys are. For our next Pokemon, we're going to be taking a look at Kenkri. These poison and dark type Pokemon are based off of Kenku as well as Hags. Kenku are flightless bird humanoids who lost their voices and their wings eons ago, but they can mimic any sound that they hear, which Hiro and I thought would be perfect for this little vulture witch. Kenkri will eventually evolve into Kencrone, and you can see some more of that witch inspiration with his little updo as well as the wart on its beak. And eventually it'll evolve into Kencoven. I absolutely love their designs, and I've gotta say, this Pokemon alone makes me think that maybe we need some more ground Pokemon in the actual game. Moving on, next we have Lumini. In D&D, unicorns are celestials, and that's the primary inspiration for this line. Lumini will eventually evolve into Prismane. And when originally designing these Pokemon, I was concerned that a fairy unicorn would just end up looking like Ponyta and Rapidash, but the overgrown nature of their hair and manes, and these fancy little bell bottoms on Prismane really help differentiate these Pokemon from our vanilla counterparts, and I love them both. Taking a little bit more of a dark turn next, we're going to have Swinel. Swinel and its evolved forms are based off of Orthons, which are the type of devil in Dungeons & Dragons. And if you've played Baldur's Gate 3, it's based off of Yerger. Swinel will eventually evolve into Cragtusk, who's now wielding 2 obsidian sabers, and Cragtusk will then evolve into Obsidiabor, who now takes a couple of notes from Pigform Ganon, and adding the skulls into its design really makes this thing an absolute beast. Heading back into the heavens, next up we're gonna have Celesteal. These little guardian Pokemon are paragons of luck, and if you get one, you are in luck because it'll eventually evolve into Seraforge. This Pokemon line are based off of Ceres, which are the D&D equivalent of angels, and Seraforge will eventually evolve into Luminarch. I wanted to have some sort of like steel angel guardian Pokemon, and I absolutely love that the Maces and Morningstars were built into the Pokemon's design as their arms. And having the mask on top of its otherwise otherworldly face really helps to show that Luminarch isn't from here. Next up after Luminarch, we have Kaboot, who in its evolved form of Noctavage are based off of owlbears. Owlbears are fiercely territorial, owlbears, and they're a staple in every D&D environment. Next up, we have the seasonal Pokemon known as Phaedron. Phaedron by default is a fairy-type Pokemon, but depending on what season and what area you capture it in, it takes on a different set of stats, abilities, and secondary typings. Phaedron are based off of Eladrin elves, who can also change their appearance and personality based off of what season they associate themselves with. Each of the 4 forms focus on a different strategy in battle, with the autumn and summer ground and fire types being more aggressive, and the winter and spring ice and grass types being more defensive. It also took us a while to figure out how to make an elf not just look like an elf, and I love these little Fraggle fairies. Moving on, next we're gonna have Scraplet, who is an animated armor. As Scraplet gets stronger, they change out their armor and weapons for something a bit more effective. Scraplet's just put together with random pieces of armor that it could find, and it's equipped with a small dagger. It'll eventually evolve into Metalliant, who is now rocking an entire set of armor and a proper sword and buckler. And when it finally ascends to its final form, it becomes Agelord. And I love this guy's journey from conscripted squire all the way to a battlefield commander. For our next Pokemon, we're going to have our Battlemaster fighter, Griffreich, who are obviously based off of Griffins. In its evolved form, Griffangard, our proficient pugilists, are just as capable in the air as they are on the ground. And the Wing Fists are an especially amazing touch on these Pokemon. Next up, we're going to go back up to the heavens with some more Celestials, with Serapuff and Elizabeth. These fairy flying type Pokemon are based off of Holophants. And while Holophants are typically small little fellas, I wanted to combine that idea with a war elephant and have it evolve. And in both of these forms, they are absolutely adorable. And just look at those little bum wings! Let's take a look at our fossils next. First up, if you can find yourself a plate fossil, you'd be able to summon a Stegite, and Stegite then evolves into Stegmon. The lava that flows throughout this Pokemon's body burns so hot that it builds up enough pressure to turn its rocky plate into pure diamond. And if you get your hands on a Hammer fossil, you can get yourself a Mjolnir. And this little Ankylosaurus with its tiny little mace will evolve into Mjolnir. I wanted both of our Dino fossils to be more defensive Pokemon, and I am not disappointed by either of these fantastic designs. But moving on to a different ancient being, let's take a look at Scarabit, who evolves eventually into Phylactazar. Both of these Pokemon are based off of liches and their phylacteries. And for those of you that don't know, a phylactery is something that a lich stores their soul in, so that way if you're able to take the lich down, it can be reborn using that little piece of itself. And having both of these Pokemon look like they're a part of some sort of ancient amulet really hammers that home. Getting closer to the end of the Pokedex, let's take a look at Sign. This little hollowed out pine cone spends most of its time meditating, until it eventually cultivates enough power to evolve into Cypher, and eventually, one more time, into Cypheros. These Pokemon are all based off of Dryads, and I wanted something to serve as sort of an opposite to the Succubus Pokemon that would be in nature as opposed to dark caves. And I absolutely love the bark dress and mask as well as the pinecone earrings. Our next bunch of Pokemon are going to be all references to different party members from Baldur's Gate 3. So first, let's take a look at Mama K with Moltres. These Pokemon run at such a high temperature that they need to be constantly exerting themselves so that way they don't overheat. And a Moltres will eventually evolve into Volcator. The broken horn is not only an homage to Karlach, but it also helps to vent excess heat as it now burns even brighter. Another notable part of this Pokemon's inspiration is obviously Minotaurs. Next up, we have Echolure, who are based off of vampire bats and everybody's favorite vampire. Echolure will then evolve into Glamire, who use their psychic powers to beguile its unsuspecting victims. And I always love when you can make fur and feathers look like clothes, and just check out this little fancy lad. Next up, we have everybody's favorite little good pup with Impupus. And even though Impupus looks like it should definitely be fire type, it's not. It's fighting and dark type. And when it evolves into Malhound, you can see a little bit of the servitude that Will is forced into with his ankle bracelets. And then eventually Malhound will evolve into Baelgarm, who despite its dark typing is incredibly gentle and only fights for justice. For our final party member reference, let's take a look at Githeri, our Gith Pokemon. And this little frog elf is eventually going to evolve into Githkar, and finally Kithrakor. While it's not necessarily a direct reference to Lae'zel, she and the Gith obviously inspired these Pokemon, and I really wanted to have a psychic fighting type that fought with Psyblades. So what do you think of our Baldur's Gate 3 party? Let me know. But now that we're nearing the end, let's take a look at our pseudo-legendary Pokemon, who appropriately is a Tarask. And with Tyranix, we have this happy little fella, but he's not going to stay happy or little for very long. Tyranix will eventually evolve into Terraloy, growing a bit in size and getting a little bit more aggressive. And eventually, Terraloy will evolve into Terranox. And these massive Pokemon are only second in size to our giant purple worm from earlier in the video. These Pokemon are incredibly destructive, and if not properly trained, will run rampant throughout the countryside looking for anything to crush. But now it's going to be time to move into our legendary trio. First up, we have Faithrias, who are based off of fairy dragons. And if you're a Disney fan, you can also see a little bit of that Figment inspiration. Next up after Faithrias is Mindrias, who are based off of Amethyst dragons. And finally, after Mindrias, our third and final member of the trio is Aetherias, who are based off of Metallic dragons. When the god of magic created Pokemon for the world of Aetheria, it left Faithrias, Mindrias, and Aetherias in charge of maintaining balance. But that balance is broken by Ragnarok, who is a Pokemon based off of Tiamat. It sort of works as the anti-magic Pokemon. The evil team of the region created Ragnarok in an effort to take magic away from Pokemon and give it back to humans. But the player character, Professor Violet, and of course, the god of magic and dragons himself, Aethergos, based off of Bahamut, are gonna put a stop to that. Even though Aethergos shares a Dragon Steel typing with Aetherias, its ability actually gives it stab with any type, to really try and hammer home the fact that this Pokemon is not only the creator of magic, but the creator of Pokemon in this world. So that's it. That is the Aetherian Pokedex. If you liked the video and you made it all the way here and you're not already, definitely make sure you subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments down below what some of your favorite Pokemon are and what would your team be. I'm going to continue to make Aetheria content throughout the rest of this year and into next year, and Mabe has been working on a ROM hack that hopefully I'll be able to lend a little bit of assistance to. So if you want to help beta test that game or just want to join the community, make sure you hit up the Discord down below. But I'll catch you all next time, and thanks so much for watching. See ya.